In the ancient town of Salem, Massachusetts, where the shadows of history's darkest chapter still lingered like smoke from long-extinguished flames, the year 1888 brought with it a case so extraordinary and disturbing that it would challenge every assumption about the nature of justice, the power of the supernatural, and the terrible consequences that could follow when the past refused to remain buried. Nearly 2 centuries had passed since the infamous witch trials that had stained Salem's reputation with innocent blood. Yet the town found itself confronting a mystery that seemed to resurrect the very fears and superstitions that its citizens had spent generations trying to overcome. The woman at the center of this impossible case was known as Constance Morrow, though investigation would later reveal that this name, like everything else about her, was shrouded in deception and mystery that defied rational explanation. She had appeared in Salem during the early months of 1888, claiming to be a widow seeking a quiet place to live out her remaining years in peace and solitude. Her modest cottage on the outskirts of town, purchased with gold coins that bore no mint marks recognizable to local merchants, became her sanctuary from a world that she claimed had treated her with suspicion and cruelty for reasons she preferred not to discuss. Constance's appearance was striking in ways that immediately drew attention from Salem's residents, though not necessarily the kind of attention that a woman seeking anonymity might have desired. She possessed an ageless quality that made it impossible to determine whether she was 30 or 60 years old, with features that seemed to shift subtly depending on the light and the observer's perspective. Her eyes held depths that suggested experiences spanning far more time than any single lifetime could contain, while her movements carried a grace that seemed to defy the physical limitations that affected ordinary mortals. But it was not her unusual appearance that ultimately brought Constance to the attention of Salem's authorities, but rather the strange events that began occurring throughout the town shortly after her arrival. Livestock fell ill with maladies that local veterinarians could not diagnose or treat, while crops withered in fields that had been productive for generations. More disturbing were the reports of children who spoke of dreams filled with visions of a dark-haired woman who beckoned them to follow her into forests that existed only in their sleeping minds. The accusations that eventually led to Constance's arrest came from Martha Prescott, the elderly widow of a respected minister who claimed to have witnessed the newcomer engaging in practices that could only be described as witchcraft. According to Martha's testimony, she had observed Constance conducting rituals in her garden during the darkest hours of night, ceremonies that involved the sacrifice of small animals and the recitation of words in languages that no Christian should know. More damning was Martha's claim that she had seen Constance transform herself into the shape of various animals, taking the form of a great black cat that prowled the streets seeking victims for purposes that the witness could only guess at but feared to imagine. These accusations, which might have been dismissed as the fantasies of an elderly woman under different circumstances, gained credibility when other residents came forward with similar stories of supernatural encounters and unexplained phenomena. The trial that followed was conducted according to legal procedures that had supposedly evolved beyond the superstitious hysteria of Salem's notorious past. Yet the evidence presented and the testimony given revealed that the town's relationship with the supernatural remained complex and troubling. Judge Cornelius Blackwood, who presided over the proceedings, was a man of education and refinement who prided himself on rational thinking and scientific skepticism, but even he found himself struggling to explain the phenomena that multiple witnesses described with remarkable consistency. The prosecution's case rested not only on eyewitness testimony, but on physical evidence that seemed to support claims about Constance's supernatural abilities. Items found in her cottage included books written in languages that scholars from Harvard University could not identify, along with artifacts that appeared to predate any known civilization, yet showed no signs of age or deterioration. Most disturbing were the preserved specimens of plants and animals that exhibited characteristics suggesting exposure to forces that conventional science could not explain. Constance's defense throughout the trial was conducted with a calm dignity that impressed even those who believed her guilty of the crimes charged against her. She spoke eloquently about the persecution that women like herself had faced throughout history, arguing that the accusations against her were motivated by fear and ignorance rather than genuine evidence of wrongdoing. When pressed about the unusual items found in her possession, She claimed they were family heirlooms, inherited from ancestors whose traditions had been misunderstood and demonized by those who lacked the knowledge to appreciate their true significance. But perhaps most unsettling was Constance's apparent foreknowledge of events that had not yet occurred, demonstrated through comments and observations that proved remarkably prescient as the trial progressed. She seemed to know details about the personal lives and hidden secrets of those who testified against her, information that she could not have acquired through normal means, yet which proved accurate when investigated by the court. The verdict of guilty that was eventually rendered reflected not so much a rational assessment of the evidence as a community's desperate need to find someone responsible for the unexplained troubles that had plagued Salem since Constance's arrival. Judge Blackwood sentenced her to death by burning, a punishment that technically had no legal precedent in Massachusetts law, but which seemed somehow appropriate given the nature of the charges and the town's historical relationship with accused witches. The execution was scheduled for October 31st, 1888, a date that Constance herself suggested with a smile that observers found deeply unsettling. As the day approached, Salem's residents prepared for a spectacle that they hoped would finally rid their community of the malevolent influence that had disrupted their peaceful existence. But the events that unfolded on that autumn morning would prove that their troubles were only beginning, and that some forces could not be contained by human law or destroyed by earthly fire. As we delve into this impossible tale, where the supernatural intersects with human justice, we must confront the uncomfortable possibility that some individuals possess powers that transcend our understanding of natural law. The story we're exploring challenges our assumptions about the nature of reality and forces us to question whether the witch trials of Salem's past might have been motivated by fears that were more justified than history has acknowledged. If you find yourself drawn to these investigations into the boundaries between the possible and impossible, please share your thoughts in the comments below and join our community by subscribing to the channel. The morning of the execution dawned grey and cold, with a mist that seemed to rise from the earth itself rather than the natural fog that typically rolled in from the Atlantic. The townspeople gathered in the square where a pyre had been constructed, according to historical precedents, that most had hoped never to see revived in their lifetimes. But the crowd that assembled to witness Constance's death was motivated not by bloodlust, but by a desperate hope that her destruction would restore normality to their troubled community. Constance was led to the pyre with the same calm dignity that had characterized her behavior throughout the trial, showing no signs of fear or regret as she approached what should have been her final moments. She was bound to the stake according to procedures that had been researched in historical documents, while the wood that surrounded her had been blessed by every minister in Salem in the hope that divine sanction would ensure the effectiveness of their action. But when the flames were lit and began to consume the wooden structure that surrounded the condemned woman, witnesses observed phenomena that challenged every assumption about the nature of fire, death, and human mortality. The flames that should have ended Constance's life seemed instead to dance around her without causing harm, creating patterns of light and shadow that suggested intelligence and purpose rather than random combustion. As the fire intensified and the crowd watched in growing amazement and horror, Constance began to speak in voices that seemed to come from multiple sources simultaneously, reciting words in the unknown languages that had been found in her books, while her body remained untouched by flames that should have reduced her to ash within minutes. The wooden pyre burned completely, leaving only the metal chains that had bound her to the stake, but Constance herself stood unharmed in the center of the destruction, her clothing and hair unmarked by fire that had consumed everything else. The crowd's reaction to this impossible spectacle ranged from religious awe to primal terror, as witnesses struggled to comprehend what they had observed and its implications for their understanding of the natural world. Some fell to their knees in prayer, convinced they had witnessed either divine intervention or demonic protection, while others fled in panic, certain that they had seen proof of supernatural powers that no human authority could hope to contain or control. Judge Blackwood, who had remained to oversee the execution, found himself confronting evidence that challenged not only his legal authority, but his fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality and human limitation. His official report of the incident, preserved in court records that were sealed for more than a century, describes phenomena that he struggled to document in language that would be credible to future readers while remaining faithful to what he had witnessed. The condemned woman displayed capabilities that transcend normal human experience and defy explanation through conventional understanding of physical law, Blackwood wrote. Her survival of fire that completely consumed the wooden structure surrounding her suggests either divine protection or supernatural abilities that place her beyond the reach of earthly justice. I am compelled to recommend that further action regarding her case be postponed, pending consultation with authorities whose expertise extends beyond the limitations of conventional legal jurisdiction. Constance's response to her miraculous survival was to thank the court for providing her with an opportunity to demonstrate the futility of attempting to destroy forces that existed beyond the reach of human authority. She walked away from the site of her execution with the same calm dignity that had characterized her behavior throughout the ordeal, disappearing into the crowd of stunned witnesses before anyone had recovered sufficiently to attempt to detain her. The immediate aftermath of the failed execution was marked by confusion and controversy, as Salem's authorities struggled to determine how to respond to events that had no legal precedent and challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of criminal justice. Some argued that Constance's survival proved her innocence and that she should be freed from all charges, while others maintained that her supernatural abilities only confirmed her guilt and the danger she represented to the community. But before any official decision could be reached, Constance had vanished from Salem entirely, leaving behind only her cottage and the mystery of what she truly was and where she had gone. The house itself was found to be empty of all personal belongings, though it contained evidence of activities that suggested its former occupant had been preparing for departure long before her trial and attempted execution. The years that followed Constance's disappearance were marked by reports of supernatural encounters and unexplained phenomena throughout New England that seemed to bear her distinctive signature. Travelers spoke of encountering a dark-haired woman on lonely roads who offered assistance to those in need, while asking for favors in return that seemed innocent until their true cost became apparent. Communities throughout Massachusetts and the surrounding states reported increases in mysterious disappearances, unexplained illnesses, and supernatural manifestations that local authorities were powerless to investigate or prevent. Most disturbing were the accounts provided by individuals who claimed to have encountered Constance directly in the years following her escape from Salem. These witnesses described a woman who had not aged since 1888, but who possessed capabilities and knowledge that seemed to have expanded far beyond what she had demonstrated during her trial. She appeared to have developed networks of followers and associates who served purposes that observers could only guess at, but feared to investigate too closely. Dr. Edmund Hartwell, a professor of folklore and anthropology at Harvard University, who made an extensive study of the Constance Morrow case, documented patterns of supernatural activity throughout New England that suggested the presence of an organized system of occult influence operating under her direction. His research, conducted during the 1920s and 1930s, revealed connections between seemingly unrelated incidents of unexplained phenomena that pointed to coordination by an intelligence that possessed both supernatural abilities and detailed knowledge of human psychology and social organization. The evidence suggests that we are dealing not with a simple case of individual supernatural ability, but rather with a systematic effort to establish networks of influence that operate according to principles that conventional understanding cannot address. Dr. Hartwell wrote in his classified report to federal authorities, "The individual known as Constance Morrow appears to have used her escape from Salem as an opportunity to expand her activities and develop capabilities that pose potential threats to public safety and social stability on a scale that local law enforcement is not equipped to address." The professor's investigation revealed that Constance had apparently been recruiting followers from among individuals who possessed particular psychological or spiritual characteristics that made them susceptible to her influence. These recruits were gradually introduced to practices and beliefs that transformed them into extensions of her will, creating a network of agents who could operate in locations where her direct presence might attract unwanted attention. The methods used to identify and recruit these followers demonstrated sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics that enabled Constance to target individuals whose disappearance or transformation would cause minimal disruption while maximizing the utility of their service to her purposes. She seemed particularly drawn to those who possessed knowledge, skills, or access that could serve her expanding influence, while avoiding attention that might trigger organized resistance to her activities. The transformation that her followers underwent appeared to involve not just psychological conditioning, but actual enhancement of their capabilities in ways that conventional science could not explain. Witnesses reported encountering individuals who had been ordinary citizens before their association with Constance, but who subsequently displayed supernatural abilities similar to her own, though typically less developed and apparently dependent on continued contact with their patron. Federal investigation into the case was initiated during the 1930s, when reports of Constance-related activity began to suggest coordination between occult groups across multiple states and possible connections to international organizations whose activities were considered relevant to national security. The Bureau of Investigation assigned Agent Robert Chen to develop a comprehensive assessment of the threat that Constance and her network might represent to public safety and government stability. Agent Chen's investigation revealed evidence that Constance had been active in various forms throughout American history, with documentation suggesting that the woman tried in Salem in 1888 might have been the same individual who had appeared under different names in other communities during previous decades and centuries. Records from colonial archives, when carefully analyzed, revealed patterns of supernatural activity associated with mysterious women whose descriptions matched Constance's appearance and capabilities. The agent's report concluded that Constance represented a unique form of supernatural entity whose goals and capabilities remained largely unknown, but whose influence appeared to be expanding in ways that could pose long-term threats to social stability and government authority. The investigation recommended ongoing monitoring of her activities, along with development of containment strategies that could be implemented if her influence reached levels that required direct intervention. But the practical challenges of tracking and containing an individual who possessed supernatural abilities and operated through networks of enhanced followers proved to be beyond the capabilities of conventional law enforcement agencies. Constance's apparent immortality and her ability to transform her appearance and identity made identification difficult, while her followers' enhanced capabilities and absolute loyalty created operational security that intelligence agencies found nearly impossible to penetrate. The case files that documented federal efforts to monitor Constance's activities were classified at levels that prevented academic study or public awareness of the investigation, though periodic releases of sanitized documents provided glimpses into ongoing efforts to understand and contain supernatural threats to national security. The existence of these programs suggested that Constance's case had been part of a broader pattern of encounters between government authority and supernatural entities that challenged conventional understanding of reality and human limitation. As our investigation reveals the terrifying evolution of the witch who escaped Salem's flames, we must confront the possibility that supernatural forces continue to operate in our modern world, hidden behind veils of secrecy and protected by our own reluctance to acknowledge what we cannot understand. If these revelations about the ongoing presence of supernatural entities compel you to reflect on the hidden dangers that may lurk in the shadows of our rational world, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more explorations into the mysteries that official history prefers to ignore. The modern era brought new challenges for tracking Constance's activities, as technological advancement created opportunities for supernatural entities to operate through electronic media and global communication systems while maintaining the anonymity and mobility that had always characterized her methods. Reports from the late 20th and early 21st centuries suggested that she had adapted to contemporary conditions while maintaining the essential characteristics that had defined her since her appearance in Salem. Investigators who attempted to trace her influence through modern channels found evidence of coordination between occult groups, unusual disappearances, and supernatural phenomena that suggested the same organizing intelligence that had been active for more than a century. But the scale and complexity of her operations appeared to have expanded far beyond what had been observed during earlier periods, raising questions about whether her capabilities were continuing to evolve and what her ultimate objectives might be. The psychological profiles developed by researchers who studied her case suggested that Constance represented a form of predatory intelligence that viewed humanity as a resource to be harvested and manipulated rather than a species deserving of consideration or protection. Her apparent immortality and supernatural abilities enabled her to pursue long-term objectives that spanned multiple human generations, while her understanding of human psychology allowed her to exploit weaknesses and desires that her victims were often unaware they possessed. The recruitment methods that she employed seemed designed to identify individuals whose particular talents, knowledge, or social position could serve her purposes while simultaneously eliminating potential threats to her continued operation. Those who were recruited often found their lives enhanced in ways that made them grateful for her attention, while those who posed obstacles to her activities tended to experience misfortunes that were difficult to trace to any specific cause, but which effectively removed them from positions where they could interfere with her plans. The communities that had been exposed to her influence showed patterns of change that suggested systematic social engineering designed to create conditions favorable to her continued operation. These changes typically involved increases in supernatural belief and occult practice, along with decreased skepticism about claims that conventional science could not validate. Local authorities in affected areas often found themselves dealing with unexplained phenomena that strained their resources while making them more receptive to assistance from sources that claimed specialized knowledge about supernatural threats. The academic study of the Constance Morrow case was complicated by classification of government records and the reluctance of witnesses to discuss experiences that they feared would not be believed or that might attract unwanted attention from supernatural forces. The few researchers who were granted access to relevant documentation found themselves confronting evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality while raising questions about humanity's ability to understand or defend against supernatural threats. The theological implications of Constance's case created divisions within religious communities about whether her survival of execution by fire represented divine protection, demonic power, or natural phenomena that had not yet been adequately understood by science. Some denominations incorporated her story into doctrines about the ongoing presence of supernatural evil in the world, while others dismissed the entire case as mass hysteria and historical exaggeration. The legal precedents established by her case influenced judicial approaches to subsequent claims involving supernatural phenomena, though courts remained reluctant to acknowledge officially that such forces might exist or that legal systems might need to develop new frameworks for addressing crimes that transcended normal categories of human behavior. The inability to contain or punish Constance through conventional legal means highlighted limitations in systems of justice that had been designed to address purely human criminality. The international implications of her case became apparent when similar patterns of supernatural activity were reported in other countries, suggesting that the phenomenon represented by Constance was not unique to American soil, but might be part of a broader pattern of supernatural entities operating throughout the world. Intelligence agencies began sharing information about unexplained events that might indicate coordination between supernatural forces that transcended national boundaries and conventional understanding of political organization. The possibility that Constance had established connections with similar entities in other regions raised questions about whether humanity faced a coordinated supernatural threat that operated according to objectives and timelines that extended far beyond normal human experience. The evidence suggested that what had begun as a local problem in Salem had evolved into a global phenomenon that challenged every assumption about human security and the nature of the threats that civilized society might need to address. The ultimate fate of Constance Morrow remains unknown, though reports of her activities continue to surface in locations throughout the world where unexplained phenomena and supernatural encounters suggest her continued presence. Whether she represents a unique individual who has achieved immortality through supernatural means, or an example of a larger category of entities that have always existed alongside humanity but remained hidden from general awareness, remains a question that investigators have been unable to answer definitively. The case of the witch who was never burned serves as a reminder that human understanding of reality may be far more limited than we assume, and that the forces that shape our world may include entities whose existence and capabilities transcend the boundaries of conventional knowledge. Constance's escape from Salem's flames was not an ending, but a beginning, the first chapter in a story that continues to unfold in shadows and whispers, always just beyond the reach of those who would seek to understand or contain it. Her legacy lies not in the crimes she was accused of in 1888, but in the demonstration that some mysteries are too profound for human resolution, and that some individuals possess powers that place them forever beyond the reach of earthly justice. The witch who was never burned may continue to walk among us, transformed by centuries of experience into something that defies every category of understanding that humanity has developed to explain the world around us. In the end, perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Constance's story is not what she has done, but what she represents, the possibility that reality contains depths and dangers that our rational minds prefer not to acknowledge, and that the safety we assume in our modern world may be nothing more than an illusion that persists only as long as the forces that could shatter it choose to remain hidden in the shadows where they have always dwelt.